On average, people make $50,000 a year. And if that sounds like decent money, pause for a second because what that number feels like and what it actually is are two very different things. After federal taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, and depending on your state, you are realistically looking at somewhere around $35,000 to $40,000 in take-home pay, which is about $3,000 a month, give or take. Now think about where that goes in a reasonable city like Nashville, Denver, or Raleigh, where a one-bedroom apartment will cost you somewhere between $1,200 and $1,800 a month for something basic. That means a huge portion of your income is gone before you even start living your life. Then come the rest of your expenses, car insurance, phone, internet, groceries, subscriptions, and all the small recurring charges that never feel like much on their own but add up over time. By the middle of the month, your account already feels tight, and by the end, the money is just gone. And the strange part is you do not remember making any big decisions that explain it. You did not buy anything crazy, you did not make some huge mistake, and yet the outcome is the same. You are not irresponsible and you are not bad with money, but it still feels like you are doing something wrong. And that feeling is more common than people admit. So the real question is not why you cannot save money. The real question is why it feels like you should be able to, but cannot. Because those are two very different problems. If the math was obviously broken, you would accept it. But the frustrating part is that it looks like it should work. You make a decent salary, you are not overspending in any obvious way, and yet nothing accumulates. That is where most people start blaming themselves when in reality, the situation is more structural than personal. This is where the idea of the treadmill becomes useful not as a metaphor for working hard, but as a way to understand how the system responds to your effort. A treadmill does not care how hard you run, it only matches your speed. When you move faster, it moves faster. And for a lot of people earning between $40,000 and $70,000, that is exactly what their financial life feels like. You get a raise and somehow your expenses adjust. You try to be more disciplined and something else takes its place. You feel like you are making progress, but your position does not actually change. Most people assume the solution is simple. Just earn more money and everything will fix itself, but that is only partially true. When income increases, spending usually follows, not because people are reckless, but because their environment changes. A higher income gives access to better housing, better experiences, and different expectations. Your peer group shifts, your daily environment shifts, and your definition of normal shifts with it. Suddenly, what used to feel expensive now feels reasonable, and what used to feel like a luxury now feels like a baseline. This is what people call lifestyle inflation, but that makes it sound optional, when in reality it is often automatic. It is not just about what you want, it is about what your environment expects from you, and those expectations are powerful. At the same time, the biggest expense in your life, housing, has been rising faster than wages in many places, which compresses your ability to create any margin at all. So even if you are doing things right, the gap between what you earn and what you keep does not expand the way you expect it to. To really understand this, you have to stop looking at your finances as one number and start looking at the system around it. Inside that system, there are what I call 4 drains, and these are not dramatic one-time mistakes. These are quiet, ongoing forces that pull money out of your life. The first is rent, which is not just another expense, but the center of your entire financial structure. Where you live determines your commute, your social life, your daily habits, and even the cost of everything around you. When you choose a location, you are not just choosing a rent number, you are choosing an entire ecosystem, and that ecosystem has a cost. That is why simply moving somewhere cheaper does not always fix the problem, because it can introduce other costs that replace the savings. The second drain is subscriptions and recurring payments, which are designed to be small enough that you do not think about them. Individually, they feel harmless, but collectively they create a steady outflow of money that requires no decision after the initial sign-up. The third drain is social spending, which is one of the most misunderstood parts of personal finance. This is not about being impulsive, this is about maintaining relationships and participating in your social environment. Saying yes to dinners, trips, and events is not irrational. It is part of how people stay connected, but it comes with a cost that is rarely tracked. The fourth drain is the structure of how income is taxed and how different types of income are treated, which over time creates a gap between people who rely entirely on wages and people who also have access to assets. When you combine all 4 of these drains, the outcome starts to make sense. Even if each one feels manageable on its own together, they absorb most of the margin that would otherwise become savings. That is why small changes rarely feel like they move the needle, because the issue is not one expense. It is the interaction between all of them. Now, consider what happens once your fixed costs are set. Rent, car payments, insurance, and basic living expenses create a baseline that you have to maintain every month. And once that baseline is established, it does not come down easily. You can increase your lifestyle quickly, but reducing it takes time, effort, and often uncomfortable trade-offs. This is where the concept of a financial gap becomes important, because your real financial strength is not your income. It is the space between your income and your fixed costs. That space is what allows saving, investing, and eventually compounding, but if that space never forms, nothing builds over time. This is why 2 people with similar incomes can end up in completely different financial positions. One person allows their costs to rise with their income and stays in the same place, while another keeps their costs relatively stable for a period of time and builds a gap that compounds. The difference is not intelligence or discipline, it is structure. Early decisions about where you live, how you spend, and what you commit to financially create a foundation that shapes everything that follows. If your baseline is too high from the beginning, it becomes very difficult to create momentum later, because every dollar you earn is already spoken for. On the other hand, if you create even a small gap early on, that gap starts to work in your favor, and over time it becomes easier to build on it. This is where many people feel stuck, because they are operating at a level where they earn too much to ignore the problem, but not enough to easily solve it, and that middle range is where the system feels the most frustrating. So what actually changes the outcome is not just earning more money or cutting random expenses, but making deliberate structural decisions. The first is being intentional about your cost structure early in your career before your lifestyle becomes locked in. The second is creating a consistent gap between what you earn and what you need, even if it is small at first, because that gap is what allows you to start building something. The third is gradually shifting toward forms of income and assets that are not entirely dependent on your time, because that is where compounding begins to work in your favor. None of this is easy and none of it happens instantly, but it is different from simply trying harder within the same system, because the goal is not to run faster on a treadmill that adjusts to you. The goal is to step into a position where your effort actually moves you forward. You are not behind and you are not failing. You are operating inside a system that is more complex than it looks at the surface. And once you understand that, you can start making decisions that work with it instead of against it. If you found this video useful, subscribe for more similar contents.